Salvete discipuli. This is Magister Muth. Today we're going to be starting Pliny's second letter on the eruption of Vesuvius, letter 620. So let's jump right in. We're going to start with our standard letter introduction, where we have the nominative Gaius Plinius. He short for salutem dicit, basically says or sends his greetings to the dative to Tacito suo, to his Tacitus. Kind of like a my dear Tacitus, a familiar way of greeting his friend, the historian. And from the start of a letter, we're going to have to intuit what Tacitus had replied to his last letter, where Pliny, we might remember, left off. And then at the time, my mother and I, but that's a story for another day. So Pliny says, ais. Don't often see this form in the second person of verb ait, which is to say, kind of like quotation marks. So you say is going to be an indirect statement. You say that you, being the subject. Now we need to look for our infinitive verb of an indirect statement. So skimming through, I see we have a relative clause that we can skip, going through scripsi, the verb. And I see two infinitives, cupere and cognoscere. And one's to want or to desire, and to know. So I'm going to take cupere as the main verb. You say that you want to know. This one, cognoscere, then being a complementary infinitive, want to do something. That you want to know. And eventually we're going to have the indirect question answer. You want to know what? That's going to be this quos clause. But before we get there, he's going to describe you a little bit. You who were adductum, led to something, drawn to something, led there by the litteris, by the letter, here in the plural as a collective noun. The letters is in letters of the alphabet, which in the plural can be literature or letter. By the letter which, feminine plural, so that's referring to the letter which scripsi, which ego, I wrote something tibi, to you, you who were exigens, which is basically urging, present active participle. So you who are urging de morte, about the death of unculi mei, of my uncle. So you say that you, led on by the letter which I wrote you about the death of my uncle, you who were urging, exigens, you wish to know quos ego, so which something, we'll talk about what that's describing, basically what I, being relictus, left behind at Misenum. If we review our map quickly, Misenum is over here on the left. That's where Pliny the Elder's villa is, where Pliny the Younger stayed during the eruption while his uncle sailed and got diverted. So at Misenum, you want to know quos, and this quos is going to be describing our accusative plural, metus and casus. So you want to know what not only fears verum etiam, but also misfortunes, things that fell out badly. Per tulerem. What things? Perim, that's an I, and per tuli comes from fero fere tuli. What things I kind of bore through, carried out, endured. And this being a perfect subjunctive in our indirect question. All right, so pretty dense. You wish to know what not only fears, but also misfortunes I endured. left behind at Misenum. And now we have our little parenthetical anima bruperam for I pluperfect indicative. I had broken up, think abruptly, ingressus, having entered it. That's referring to the last letter where he starts about to mention what he and his mother did, and then he abruptly broke off. And now, Pliny, being a very well-educated Roman, is going to drop an impressive Vergil quote that's perfectly appropriate for the situation. This is a reference to when Aeneas in Book 2 is visiting Dido, and she asks him to tell him his whole long, sad story about the Trojan War, and he says, quam, although, and although my animus, my mind, or my spirit, horret, it shudders, it bristles, so we get horrible, it bristles to remember, although that incipiam, future indicative, I will begin, like the inception of something is the beginning. As a reminder, me mini is what we call a defective verb, meaning it only exists in the perfect system. So me mini are perfect tense. We translate as a present, I remember, and our perfect infinitive, me minisse, we translate as just a present infinitive, to remember. Right. So, although it's hard to recall, Pliny's going to tell us the story. Starting with profecto. Yeah. That's from our lovely deponent verb, proficiscor, which is to depart or set out. So we're going to start with an ablative absolute, with my uncle having set out. Nice perfect active since it's a deponent. Ipse, someone themselves, and looking at our verb, impendi, that's an I. So ego ipsi, I myself spent, literally weighed something out, and they spent what? I spent the reliquum tempus, the remaining time. So just like in English, Latin uses to spend time, like a money metaphor there. I spent the remaining time in studies. I'm going to take this as a dative completing that compound verb impendi, since you spend the accusative something, then we take that in prefix on my studies. Remember that datives often complete those compound verbs. Spent my remaining time in studies, once again, logically explaining with our for, which always comes second in its clause, for remanseram. Perfect. I had remained, ideo, thus, maybe for this reason. So why had Pliny stayed behind? Well, for studying, and he told us that in the last letter. He routed through his homework. So soon, and now we're going to have a couple nouns here, which we could tell from Cana and Somnus are all nominative. So soon, bath, dinner, sleep. And sleep that is inquietus, not restful, and parevis, short. So we need some sort of verb implied. I think an erat makes the most sense. So soon there was, maybe even erat mihi, I had bath, dinner, and sleep. We can describe this literary technique a couple ways, but I'd say it's certainly an example of asyndeton, meaning no conjunctions, boom, 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 kind of showing the quick succession of actions, very common in a epistolary style, a letter like this, and it's also an example of ellipsis, since that verb has been left out. All right, so he goes through his usual evening, tries to go to sleep, and now he's going to tell us a couple things that had been going on. Prae caeserat, another clue perfect. Something had catoed, had gone prae in front. preceded. And something had proceeded per multos dies, through many days, and then we get our nominative subject, tremor, a shaking, terrae of the earth. So earthquakes have been going on for many days. But these earthquakes were menos, less formidulosus, causing formido or fear causing. So I'll talk about tremors because it's masculine. Less fear causing, quia, because they are solitus, accustomed, and this is going to be a place construction, also evocative, in Campania. A little weird, Campania is not technically a city, it's a region of Italy, but it's clearly showing a location here. So the shaking of the earth was less fear-causing because it's common in Campania. So maybe if you live in a part of the world like California with a lot of earthquakes, small routine earthquakes aren't that big a deal. Where, but, or maybe but truly, we could see that true root. But illa nocte, on that night, in valuit. Our valeo verb has something to do with being strong, like valid. So the tremor is still our subject. The tremor grew strong. In fact, it grew so strong. Ita ut. With that trigger word ita, we're going to have a result clause that crederentur, something was believed. We need a plural subject, so we're going to take omnia or neuter as a nominative here. That everything was believed, non movere, not to be moved, nice passive infinitive, but verti, to be turned, maybe even to be overturned. So the earthquake's not just moving stuff, it's verto, it's like turning stuff around or turning stuff over. Big earthquakes. All right, so now we're in the middle of the night, an especially big earthquake. And we might remember this is the same night after the uncle left. So he's already set off, been diverted to Stabii, and he's now sleeping very pleasantly at Pomponianus' house. So at this point, erupit, burst in, like a rupture, and burst into my bedroom. Who does this? Mater. My mother burst into my bedroom. Now, at the same time, surgebam ego. So what was I doing? I was getting up in weekend, in turn. We can see this weak root. It shows up in words like vice versa. So the kind of correlation here. So I was getting up in turn, and I am excitaturus as a future active participle, about to wake someone up, about to wake her up. Si quiesceret, if the condition, if she were resting. Notice that's an imperfect subjunctive in a condition, so we're going to call that a present contrary to fact. If she were still resting, but she wasn't, she was already awake too. So both of the family members, big earthquake in the night, they're checking on each other. Re sedimus, so we sat back down, re plus sedeo, in the area courtyard. You might remember that from Pomponianus' house as well, in the courtyard of the house. And now we have a feminine relative clause, something which dividebat, which was dividing or separating the sea atectis from the buildings, literally the roofs, with a modico spatio, with a modicum of space, a small amount of space. And it makes most sense that it is the courtyard that is separating the sea from the house, not the house itself, though feminine could have referred to either of those words. And just a note on tectis, we've seen this a bunch. This is a perfect passive participle of tego, to cover, things having been covered, often referring to the roofs or the buildings. And this is an example of synecdoche, a roof sort of a coverings referring to the whole buildings, part used to refer to the whole. I remember synecdoche is a subset of metonymy, which is calling one thing by something it's associated with. All right, so they're going outside in the courtyard because of all the earthquakes, kind of like the general advice to get out of the house and shelter somewhere that's not going to collapse on you. And Pliny at this point, dubito, I doubt. And what is he doubting? I doubt, and this on is a hint here. This is kind of an or in either this or that. So we're going to have to supply a whether to start our indirect question. So Pliny has that he's doubting whether debean, present subjunctive, whether I ought vocare to call it option one, constantia, constancy, or option two, imprudentia, imprudence, lack of prudence or foolishness. And what is he saying? Could be either being very constant and steadfast or being very foolish. Well, he's going to explain. First of all, setting some context, ageam, for I was leading my duodecimum annum, 2 down from 20th year. So we take that as his 18th year, which by Roman counting we would now say is 17 years old. Romans count inclusively. So he's saying I was 18 years old at the time. So what's this possibly constant, possibly foolish thing? Posco, I demand the librum, the book, T.T. Lewy of Titus Livius, the historian, and ex carpo, jumping down to our verb, I excerpt, and lego, so, and I lego, I read, quasi, as if per otium, as if through leisure, or basically at loose ends, atque etiam, and even ex carpo, I take excerpts, ut coiperam, as I began. Coipi being another defective verb, so we won't translate this as a full pluperfect, but move it to the present system just as a simple past is fine. So, what's he doing in the courtyard amidst this unfolding crisis? He's doing more of his homework. Maybe he woke up in the middle of the night, can't sleep, and decides to be a nice, studious young adult. I'm sure we can all relate to that. So, but Eke, look, behold, he's drawing our attention to something. And amicus avunculi, a friend of my uncle, a friend qui, this will be referring to the friend, as we'll see, qui nuper, who recently venerat, pluperfect, had come ad eum to him from Spain. So they have a house guest. He ut videt, as he sees. Notice with our indicative main verb, I can tell that this must be an as, not a so that. As he sees me et matrem, me and my mother, who are sedentes, sitting down, and me veroetiam, truly even agentem, reading, as he sees this situation, he corripit, literally he kind of snatches away, or kind of seizes upon, from rapio, he seizes upon the patientiam and the securitatem, the patience of that one, namely his mother, and the securitas, the being without cura, the carefreeness of me. So he's seizing upon and probably criticizing those two qualities. The fact that his mother is being so patient by just chilling during the crisis and the earthquake, and Pliny's being carefree and reading. And notice we have these two contrasting nouns in the middle with the descriptor of who's doing them on the other side. That's a lovely example of chiasmus, chiastic word order, showing a nice contrast between the middle elements. So, nihilo senius, literally by nothing, slower or more sluggish. That's a comparative adverb. So, none the slower. Ego, I, was intentus, focused or intent. I was intent in librum, on my book. Or perhaps even verbal from intendo, stretched towards or focused on my book. Nihilo senius, very similar to another comparative adverb, nihilo minus, which we might learn as a frozen form, nonetheless, or less by none. So here's kind of slower by none, really showing his sluggish reaction to the crisis. Well, we will wrap up there for today. Valete omnes.